Welcome to Vanran10 Top 10s. And today we're going to do the top 10 cars of 1974. I know what you're thinking. It's the best year for cars ever. Wrong, not even close. In 1974 there was kind of a gas crunch problem. The early 70s had a problem with gas crunch. There was a gas crisis, the whole thing. The United States government started putting pressure on car builders to basically make cars that were more fuel efficient. That's why small Hondas and small Toyotas and some of those cars started gaining more popularity in the early to mid 70s, was because you needed to have a better gas mileage vehicle. Gas was more expensive, it was starting to climb. 1974 was probably also roughly the time the muscle car era really ended. There were still some relics from the muscle car era. You still had some Camaros, you still had some Mustangs and some Chargers and Challengers and Roadrunners, but the problem was becoming their motors were not producing as much power. You had to meet emissions and gas mileage requirements. 8 miles to the gallon is no longer allowed. So the U.S. government kind of stifles all that. So 1974 is kind of a bad year for cars, but why did I choose it? Because I was born that year. Now, I didn't drive any of these cars. None of these cars are anything I've really ever gotten to test. Some of them I would. There are some great cars on this list, but they're not going to have the juice that the cars that came before them did. I'm actually surprised that some of these cars were still in the 70s. So we'll start off with some of the qualifications of this list. First off, the pictures that I use, they belong to, I don't know where, I just found them on the internet. You type in Google, you type in that car name, and you'll find those pictures. I don't know who they belong to, they're just pictures. Also, one car per manufacturer. I started finding a lot of Fords that I liked. Half the list was going to be Fords from 1974. Seems like a boring list to me. So, also, the pictures, don't comment if there's like a slight variation. That tail light is a little bit different than, that's on the 72, not the 74. I don't care. It's close enough. You'll get the idea. Some of them are just pretty. So we'll start off with the list with the top 10 cars of 1974. The number 10 car, I'm going to look at my notes because I can't memorize all this stuff. The Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. Now, it's going to be up here. I keep pointing the wrong direction. It's going to be up here in the pictures. I'm hoping that I can edit this right. The 74 Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. The Volkswagen Carmen Ghia actually ran from 1955 to 1974. The last year of the Carmen Ghia was 1974. I always love the styling of the Carmen Ghia. I currently own a Volkswagen, but I don't recommend buying one because they're devalued because of their nice little lying thing about gas mileage and whatnot. They were available with a 1600cc engine, which is about a 1.6 liter motor. They made about 500,000 of these things in the 20 years, in about that 20-year span. Some of them were actually made in Brazil. They were a popular, and Volkswagens are pretty popular down in South America, or South America, Central America area. Always just like the styling of it. Now for number 9. I'm going Corvette Stingray, 1974 Corvette Stingray. There was a slight variation in the tail section of the Corvette Stingray due to new, 5-mile-an-hour bumpers had to be installed. So the 74 has kind of a coned rear end as opposed to the 73's flat. I think the 74 looks better than the 73. Now, the 74, once again, suffers from this gas crisis. It was the last year you could get a true big block 454 in this thing. So it was the last year of that as 7.4 liter engine. But it didn't produce very much horsepower. It produced a whopping, the L48 motor produced a whopping 195 horsepower on a car that weighed, my notes say that it weighed, 3,500 pounds. 3,500 pounds and only about 200 horsepower. That's a heavy, heavy car. The original cost of one of these things back in the 70s would have been about $6,000. They're only worth about $12,000 now in good condition. So they're not appreciating very much. If you can get one in, concourse, then yeah, it's about $28,000. But still, the 70s vets aren't really appreciating. It's not like a 67 split window Corvette Stingray. My number 8 car is going to be the Pontiac Trans Am SD455. The Pontiac Trans Am, of course, in '74, they also did kind of a styling change. The nose changed a little bit. But the 455 was the big motor, 455 cubic inch. Made about 290 horsepower, if that number's right. Yeah, 290 horsepower. Now, the 7.4 liter, I should mention this, the 7.4 liter Corvette engine did make 270 horsepower. The 74 Trans Am weighed about 500 pounds more, and it was not really faster. But 500 pounds more and only 20 horsepower, of course, is going to translate into probably losing a race. So the 455 Firebird's probably not going to beat the Corvette. The Corvette also was built more for it than the Firebird was. But the SD 455s, that was the big motor that they put in the Formula Trans Ams and the SDs. The original price of those cars was about $4,500, $1,500 less than the Corvette. And now, once again, not appreciating very much. These 70s cars don't get much more in value. $8,700 for a good one. Which means, it has to look like it's only got 10,000 miles on it, not very many nicks and scratches, no dents, good interior. Got to keep moving these things along. I'm going to get close to the camera here so I can see how much time I'm using, because I'm only allowed to have 15 minutes. Okay, so we're going to move on to the 911 Carrera RS. They only made 30 of this car in the 3.0 version. So, of course, 3.0, what's that? 3 liter. Very rare car. Recently, one sold for $440,000. Of course, that's concourse, condition, whatnot. But there's not a lot of these things out there. The RS, 3.0. RS stood for Rennsport, which is race, race sport. The original price on those cars is a little bit tougher to track down, but it went for about $25,000. The 73 version only went for about $14,000, so it was a giant bump up in price. But the 74 was a little bit quicker, but it's not as desirable. A lot of people don't think it looks as good as the 73. Personally, if you listen to Jeremy Clarkson, all Porsche 911s look the same. So, I don't understand why they'd say that one looks better than that one, and it's 1 year difference. We're going to move on to the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. Now, this is number 6 on the list. And you're going, well, why would you have a Rolls-Royce? The Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow in 1970. This is the Rolls-Royce that people my age, we picture when we think Rolls-Royce. It is the epitome of Rolls-Royce. This is how a Rolls-Royce should look. This is the classic styling. This is, and they were surprisingly, for a car that now retails for like $150,000, they only cost about $14,000 back in 1974. That's kind of odd. They went for 12,500 pounds, brand new, $15,000 in American money. And now you can still get one in good condition with about 40,000 miles on it for about $25,000. I should have bought that instead of a Volkswagen. But, of course, the repairs are going to be a little bit more on the pricey side. They made it for about, I'd say about 11 years. 65 to 76 is when the Silver Shadow was made. It had a 6.75 liter engine, V8. Made about 189 horsepower. Not going to win any drag races. It was a heavy car at 4,700 pounds. But it was a beautiful car. It's a classic. It's the classic Rolls-Royce. At number 5, the De Tomasa Pantera. This is not a well-known vehicle. Forza fans might know a little bit more about it. It had a Ford engine in it, a 351 Cleveland. After 74, or after 76, somewhere in there, Ford stopped giving the engines to Pantera. And they had to go with engines from another car make. I don't remember who it was. But the De Tomasa Pantera could do 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. Pretty good for a car in that era. Top speed of about 156 miles an hour, weighed 3,700 pounds, had a top, it was, boy, that's not even a number. The original price of these things was about $10,000. You can sell one now in concourse condition for about 70 to 80 grand. So those cars have done very well in appreciation. If you have one in good condition of those, they were rare. They're starting to really hit their stride. Ford making the motors for them is probably a little bit, iffy. But the 351 Cleveland was their. It was the 351 Cleveland, I think, was the top end of the 351 line of motors in the 70s for Ford. So the Pantera was getting a pretty good power plant. Number 4 on this list, Aston Martin Vantage. Just a beautiful car. If you haven't seen the Aston Martin Vantage of 1974, it's an underrated vehicle. There's not a lot of numbers out on these things on original price or how much, or how much they're even going for now. They go for kind of weird prices here and there. But it's a really beautiful car. It's spectacular to look at. It's got great body lines. It kind of gives you that feel of it's still carrying on the 60s Aston Martins, and you're starting to see a little bit of the 80s to 90s Aston Martins starting to come out in this thing. But it's kind of it's got a really aggressive front end. I almost hate to say it, but it almost kind of looks a little bit like the Cobra Mustangs of the 70s and 80s, the front end does. But of course the styling is much nicer than, of course, those ugly cars were. I don't have a lot of specs on those. They were very quick. 310 horsepower was made from those V8 motors. And they did 0-60 in about 5.7 seconds. Once again, really good for a car of that era. The top 3 cars, we're going to kind of bang these out quick. This car kind of surprised me how pretty this is. The Ferrari 365 GT4 BB. When you see the picture, hopefully, it is a beautiful car. It's probably the predecessor to the to the 308s and the cars of the that Magnum PI drove. Beautiful Ferrari. Underrated. I've never really taken a close look at this car. It is gorgeous. It is a really pretty car. Great styling. Don't have a lot of numbers on it. I'm going to stay away from the numbers. I got to kind of finish this list off. Number 2. You're going, well, Randy, you said we're going to have a bunch of Fords on these lists. What happened to the Ford? Here it is. The Ford Gran Torino is number 2. And you're going, what kind of stupid number 2 is that? I'm going to tell you what. It's the most famous car on the list. Because it was in Starsky and Hutch. So it's the most famous car. It still has a pretty good look. It is the Ford version of the Mercury Cougar, which I owned a Mercury Cougar. So I've got a little bit of a soft spot in there for it. I would show you a picture, but there is no picture on the internet of a 74 Torino that is not painted like the Starsky and Hutch car. And I'm not going to show it. And then I got to kind of correct myself. The number 1 car might be the actual most famous car on this list. 1974, the Lamborghini Countach is the number 1 car on my list. Now remember, this is my list. My list. All these cars are my list. These are the ones that I chose after looking on the old internet for a while. But the 74 Countach, let's face it, the Countach was one of the most beautiful Lamborghinis of all time. By what you hear of James May even say this, he says they're not really great cars to drive. In fact, to reverse them, you have to sit on the door. You have to sit on the door sill and look out backwards. But of course, this is starting to get a little bit on the long side. I was trying to keep these things at around 10 minutes, but this is just a real quick one, or not real quick. We went almost 15 minutes. But those are my top 10 cars from 1974. And to all the troops, past, present, and future, thanks for the freedom. I got to turn the camera off somehow.